Welcome, guys, to another midnight story. But tonight is not like the others. You shouldn't have come here. The shadows are watching your every step. The wind whispers secrets you were never meant to hear. Every creak, every rustle could be your last dot. Do you feel it? The darkness moving just behind you. Welcome to the Midnight Story.
9 haunting true encounters in Appalachian Rainstorms. Horror stories. Story 1. Lightning in the Hollow. I remember the night like it happened yesterday, even though it's been years, because it left a kind of cold weight in my chest that I can't shake. I was driving home through the Hollow, that narrow stretch of road winding between steep hills and thick woods, when the rain started. Not the gentle, steady kind, but the kind that seems to press down on everything, hammering the roof of my old truck and rattling against the windows like it's trying to speak. The headlights barely pierced the grey sheets, and every turn felt like the road stretched farther than it had a minute ago, twisting in ways I didn't remember from the countless times I'd driven it before. The woods on either side were dark and solid, black shapes pressed together, and I felt a shiver run through me even before I saw it. At first I thought it was just a trick of the rain, or maybe my tired eyes, but then I saw a figure standing at the edge of the road. I slowed, squinting through the downpour, expecting someone to wave or step back, but it just stood there, still, too still. Soaked to the bone, hair plastered to the face, posture awkward as if it was leaning against some invisible weight. My heart started thumping, loud enough to match the rain on the roof, and I debated whether I should stop or keep driving. I called out, my voice barely carrying over the storm, but there was no response. Only that strange reflection. I swear I saw it. A distorted echo of my own face in the wet asphalt, like the puddles had taken something from me and were showing it back. The figure didn't move as I rolled closer, and every instinct in me screamed to turn the wheel and speed past. I did neither at first, frozen in the seat, watching it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. No shape, no shadow, no wet outline, just footprints leading from the edge of the road into the woods, disappearing among the trees. The air felt different then, heavier somehow, as if the storm itself had turned and was paying attention to me. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I felt the kind of fear that settles deep in your stomach, gnawing and quiet, but unrelenting. I kept driving, headlights slicing through the sheets of rain, but the hollow had changed. Every bend seemed sharper, every hill steeper, and the rain sounded louder, closer, almost purposeful. I found myself checking the mirrors constantly, half expecting to see it materialize behind the truck, following me silently, wet and still. My mind tried to rationalize it, a prank, a neighbor, someone hiding from the storm, but the rational thoughts didn't settle. They never did. There was something about the posture, the way it had waited, that didn't make sense. Humans don't stand like that in the rain for no reason. Not without shivering, moving, doing something. Somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't just afraid of the figure. I was afraid of the hollow itself. The trees seemed taller, leaning over the road as if watching. Branches scraped the sides of the truck, even when I was careful to stay centered. The rain obscured everything, and yet I could feel it. Eyes in the darkness, the pressure of something unseen, waiting. The farther I drove, the less I trusted my own senses. I'd swear I saw movement at the edge of the road. Tiny shifts in shadow, and my headlights would catch nothing but trees and underbrush. I began talking aloud, trying to ground myself, saying the name of the town I was heading to, reminding myself I wasn't alone in the world, just to hear my voice cut through the rain. At one point, I glanced at the puddle beside the road again, half expecting to see that distorted reflection staring back. there was nothing, and yet the memory of it stayed, crawling into my thoughts like wet fingers, cold and insistent. I kept my eyes on the road, but my brain kept circling that moment, the way it had seemed alive yet not alive, a face both mine and not mine, and the way the rain had swallowed sound, leaving only the hollow and me, and that terrible stillness. Eventually, I reached the turn for my house, the rain easing just enough to see the familiar fence posts and the outline of my neighbor's barn. Relief should have washed over me, but it didn't. I parked the truck in my driveway, sat for a long time, shaking, staring at the road I'd just come down. The hollow seemed farther away, calmer, but in my mind, it still hummed with that cold presence. I kept thinking about those footprints disappearing into the trees, thinking about how the storm had seemed to watch me, how the figure had existed in a way that made no sense and no explanation could touch. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hollow, dark and endless rain pouring like it wanted to erase everything, and that figure waiting at the edge, wet and still, its reflection lingering in the puddles. The memory followed me for weeks. I would drive past that stretch of road during daylight, and it felt different, too quiet, too empty, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. I avoided the hollow whenever possible, but I couldn't escape the memory, and the fear wasn't rational anymore. It was something deeper, lodged in the bones, a sensation that the world could shift in ways I didn't understand, that a moment of quiet in the storm could become something alive and watching. Years have passed, but I still remember that night with the same clarity. I can recall the way the rain hammered, the way the hollow twisted and turned in ways it shouldn't. The distorted reflection that didn't belong to me but somehow did. I remember the footprints fading into the woods, and the cold weight in the air that followed me as I drove home. Sometimes, when it rains heavily now, I can't help but glance at puddles on the road, wondering if I'll catch a glimpse of that figure again, waiting patiently, still and impossible. The hollow isn't far from here, and I know I could drive through it any night, but I don't. I can't. Because some things aren't meant to be understood, only remembered, and some nights, that memory is enough to make the hairs on my neck stand on end long after the storm has passed. Even now, when I tell the story, I can feel it pressing at the edges of my awareness, like the rain is still falling and the hollow is still watching and the figure somehow is still there. I have no idea who or what it was. I don't know if anyone else has seen it. All I know is that it exists in that hollow, in the rain, in the spaces between thought and memory, a reminder that some nights in Appalachia carry a weight heavier than storm clouds, and some figures, soaked and silent, can linger far longer than they should. Story 2, Whispering Pines in the Downpour. I remember that night with a kind of trembling clarity that has never left me. I had been driving along a narrow forest road when the storm hit, sudden and violent, and I had no choice but to pull over beneath a dense stand of pines. The rain hammered down in thick sheets, drumming a relentless rhythm on my jacket and the roof of my truck. At first, I thought I would simply wait it out, sit and watch the grey water run off the needles above me, let the storm pass. But almost immediately, the woods didn't feel quiet. The rain was loud, yes, but beneath it there was something else, soft, barely audible, but unmistakably there. Whispers. I froze, straining to hear, telling myself it was just the wind moving through the branches, twisting and turning. But the voices didn't sound like the wind. They were urgent, faint, and almost human, circling me in the spaces between raindrops. At times, it felt as if they were right next to me, brushing my shoulder, whispering something I could almost understand, only to retreat, impossible and far, leaving me with nothing but the pounding storm and my own heart hammering against my ribs. I gripped the flashlight I had brought, and when I turned it on, the beam cut through the downpour to reveal only twisted roots and dripping branches. Nothing moved, nothing should have moved, and yet the whispering continued, sharper now, teasing me, drawing me further from the road. I convinced myself I should leave the shelter, that maybe moving toward the light of the road would make sense. But when I tried to step forward, the ground felt wrong. Mud sucked at my boots. Roots twisted and turned like snakes in the rain, and every step forward seemed to take me deeper into the forest instead of closer to safety. I tried calling out, voice trembling, but my words were swallowed by the storm. The whispers responded in kind, circling closer, seeming to come from above, below, and all around me. My flashlight flickered, and in the brief dark, I could have sworn I saw the trees bending slightly, leaning toward me, blocking paths I had just walked, closing me in. I moved cautiously, trying to map the forest in my mind, but it was impossible. The rain blurred everything, every tree melting into the next, every shadow a possible threat. The whispers seemed to respond to me, growing louder when I hesitated, fading when I hurried, as if guiding me deeper into the woods. I can't describe the feeling of being completely surrounded by something unseen, something alive in the storm, whispering words I could almost grasp but never fully. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time became meaningless. My wet jacket clung to me, cold seeping into my bones, and every sound, the drip of water, the rustle of leaves, the faint thump of my own heart, was amplified, alive with possibility. At one point, I stumbled into a small clearing, the only break in the endless tangle of pines. I thought maybe this was my chance to orient myself, to find a path back, but the clearing offered no answers. The whispers didn't stop. They circled the edges, pressing against the trees, and for a moment I considered simply running, any direction, hoping to escape. But my boots were heavy, my legs trembling, and the storm's fury seemed to push me back toward the shelter of the trees. I realized then that the forest itself had become a maze, the trees bending subtly, closing off my exit, guiding me deeper along paths that didn't make sense. I followed the whispers as best I could, though every step felt wrong. The ground was slick, roots hidden beneath puddles ready to trip me, branches whipping against my face, leaving scratches that stung in the rain. I kept thinking of my family, of home, of anything familiar, trying to anchor myself in reality, but it all felt distant. The whispers were patient, circling, waiting for me to follow, teasing me with faint syllables, words I almost recognized. I tried not to imagine faces or shapes in the dark. I knew that would make me lose control, but the more I tried to ignore them, the closer they seemed, almost breathing with the rhythm of the storm. Eventually, I stumbled again and found a faint path, a line of flattened grass that might have been used by animals, or maybe not. I followed it cautiously, flashlight shaking in my hands, ears straining for the whispers that had been my tormentors for so long. The rain slowed just slightly, and with that tiny reprieve, I could see the end of the forest approaching. The trees thinning, light from the road ahead cutting through the gloom. The whispers stopped the moment I emerged from the pines, as if they had been holding their breath, letting me go only when the canopy could no longer hide me. I collapsed to my knees, soaked, exhausted, shivering from cold and something deeper than fatigue, something that clung to the edges of my mind. Even after I reached my truck and drove the few miles home, the memory of that night lingered. I could still hear the whispers when the rain was heavy, faint and urgent, circling in the spaces between the trees in my mind. I replayed every step, every pause, every sense of the forest bending around me, and I could never reconcile it with logic. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, my fear of the storm playing tricks on me, but there was a weight to the memory, a tangibility that refused to be explained away. Every time I pass that stretch of woods, I slow down, watching the canopy of pines sway in the wind, listening for something that isn't supposed to be there. Years later, when storms come, I can still feel the way the forest seemed alive, whispering in voices I could almost understand. The image of that night sits in my chest, a cold pressure that makes my skin crawl. I think of the whispers, circling and patient, and I feel small, insignificant, a stranger in a place that is not mine. The storm and the forest are not evil, I tell myself. They're just indifferent, ancient, and capable of things I will never fully grasp. And yet, every time I hear the rain against my window or the wind through the trees, I remember that night under the pines, drenched, isolated, following voices that should not have existed, and I feel the same helpless fear I felt back then. As if part of me is still out there, lost among the whispering pines. Story 3: Cabin at the Edge of the Storm. The rain had been relentless all afternoon, hammering the ridge with a force that made even the trees shiver. I was hiking along a narrow trail, soaked through to the bone, my boots squelching in the mud, when I spotted the cabin. It was tucked just beyond a rise, half hidden by overgrown brush, its roof sagging under years of neglect, and something about it called to me, a promise of shelter, however imperfect. I hesitated at the edge of the clearing, watching the water run in rivulets down the warped boards, listening to the wind whip through broken shutters. My instincts told me to keep moving, but exhaustion weighed me down, and the thought of the dry interior, however musty, was too tempting to resist. As I pushed the door open, it groaned on its rusted hinges, sending a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cold. The smell hit me instantly. Damp wood, mildew, and the faint metallic tang of rust. The air was thick, almost viscous, holding a stillness that felt unnatural, as though the cabin itself was holding its breath. Waiting. I stepped inside cautiously, my boots squelching on the soaked floorboards, and the echo of each step seemed impossibly loud in the quiet. A rusted stove leaned awkwardly in one corner, and a chair with a broken leg had been left as if someone had just abandoned it. On a small table lay a journal, its pages stuck together from water damage. I lifted it gingerly, the cover soft and swollen, and my fingertips traced words that were nearly illegible, smudged ink telling stories I could barely piece together. I was about to set the journal down when a faint sound made me stiffen. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, but upstairs. My heart leapt, and I froze, straining to hear as the storm outside masked the subtle creaks of the floor above. Another step, slower this time, cautious. My mind raced. Surely it was an animal, a raccoon maybe, or a stray dog seeking shelter from the rain. But the rhythm was too human, too precise. My grip tightened on the journal, knuckles whitening, and I considered bolting, but my legs felt rooted. The cabin was so still that even the storm outside seemed to quiet in response, the wind holding its breath alongside me. Then came a tap at the window. Soft and deliberate, like the knuckle of a hand testing the glass. My blood ran cold. I spun toward the sound, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow flinch against the pane, though the rain blurred the edges so thoroughly I couldn't be sure. I bolted, slipping in the mud, my soaked boots failing to find traction as I stumbled down the ridge, my back to the cabin, glancing only once over my shoulder. When I did, the cabin appeared empty, its windows dark and still. No movement, no figure, only the storm lashing at the ridge, and a faint, ragged laugh that didn't belong to me carried on the wind. It was distant, almost teasing, yet it left a hollow ache in my chest, a fear that refused to fade. I didn't stop running until I reached the old logging road, water streaming down my sleeves, my lungs burning from exertion. Every step I took echoed with the memory of the cabin, the oppressive stillness, the upstairs footsteps, the deliberate tap on the window, and that laugh that lingered long after I had fled. I tried to reason it away. Maybe it was just the wind, maybe my mind playing tricks after hours of hiking in the storm. But every time I replayed it in my mind, the sounds were too precise, too intentional, and the feeling of being watched, of being followed, even in empty spaces, clung to me. That night, I lay in my bed, drenched clothes hung on the radiator, and I could still hear it. A faint, ragged chuckle threading through the storm's howl outside. It didn't make sense, and every rational explanation I conjured only made the memory sharper. The cabin existed in a place that felt outside of time, abandoned yet alive, its history partially erased by decay and storm, but still holding traces of something deeply human, or something pretending to be human, within its walls. I couldn't stop picturing the bent floorboards upstairs, the way a footfall might shift the shadows just enough to suggest presence, and the way the wind carried that laugh, making it impossible to locate, impossible to understand. Weeks passed, and I found myself driving past that ridge again, even though I had no reason to return. The cabin had vanished into the overgrowth from this distance, appearing only as a silhouette in fleeting glimpses, and every time I looked, I half expected to see movement in a window, a shadow against the swollen wood. The memory of that night stayed with me in quiet moments, when rain tapped lightly against my window, or the wind rustled the trees outside, and I would swear I could hear that tap again, faint and deliberate, a reminder that some places in these woods remember us long after we've left, long after the storm has passed. I still dream about it, not in the way of fantastical visions, but in the cold, pressing realism of someone trapped in the woods, wet and trembling, hearing subtle sounds that shouldn't exist, but undeniably do. In the dreams, the cabin is always just ahead, perched at the ridge, waiting for me to step inside. The footsteps above echo even when I try to flee. The tap at the window comes at impossible intervals, and the laugh, ragged, faint, almost mocking, threads through every moment, leaving me unsettled long after I awaken. I wake, soaked in sweat, heart hammering, wondering if the place I fled that night even exists in the same way, or if I had stumbled into a memory of something older, deeper, and far less forgiving than I can comprehend. The cabin, the storm, the footsteps, and the laugh, they are stitched into my memory as indelibly as any scar, a sequence of events that feels both impossible and entirely real. I have told friends about it in halting sentences, hesitant to press too far, because no one really wants to confront the idea that a place can hold a presence so subtle, so quiet, yet so undeniably aware of us. The fear that night left behind wasn't of a tangible threat, but something much harder to articulate. The realization that the world can be indifferent and precise at once. That the woods themselves might bear witness and react. That we are sometimes nothing more than intruders in spaces that remember our trespasses. Even now, years later, I avoid that ridge when storms roll in. Yet every time the rain pounds the roof or the wind whispers through the pines, a memory creeps back. The smell of mildew and wet wood, the rusted stove and broken chairs, the journal with its glued pages, the stairs above creaking under unseen weight, and the soft tap against the window. And always, the laugh. I can't place it, can't understand it, but it lingers in the corners of my awareness, as persistent and unavoidable as the rain itself. I wonder if the cabin waits for others as it waited for me, if it will continue to exist at the edge of the storm, quietly observing, quietly reminding anyone who dares step inside that some places are never truly abandoned and some echoes never fade. Story 4, The Flooded Road to Nowhere. I remember that night with a kind of dread that's never left me. The rain was relentless, pounding the roof of my old truck as I drove down a narrow gravel road, chasing what I thought would be a shortcut home. The storm came out of nowhere, thick and grey, blurring everything beyond a few feet in front of my headlights. Water pooled in depressions I couldn't see, and my tires splashed into hidden ditches, jerking the steering wheel and sending a shiver down my spine. I told myself to slow down, to keep calm, but the storm seemed alive, pressing against me from every side. The trees leaned inward, their branches bending under the weight of rain, dark and solid, and the hollow felt impossibly deep and endless. That's when I saw the car. It was ahead, sitting at a slight angle, doors open as if its occupants had simply vanished. Its headlights were dead, the windshield fogged with rain and condensation. I eased my truck closer, heart hammering, trying to see inside. The seats were empty, no sign of life, but the driver's seat caught my attention. There, pressed into the fabric, was a wet hand-shaped smear, fresh and glistening as though someone had just left it seconds before. A chill ran down my spine, and I could feel the storm intensify, the rain louder, the wind shrieking through the hollow like it had something to say. My pulse raced, and I instinctively gripped the wheel tighter, realizing that the shortcut I had trusted was no longer familiar. I tried to turn back, to find a way off the road, but the gravel path had vanished beneath water and mud. Every ditch, every puddle seemed to shift when I glanced at it, and soon every turn I made brought me deeper into the hollow instead of closer to escape. The road became a maze, the same patches of mud and water repeating as if I were trapped in a loop. I caught glimpses of the abandoned car ahead on every curve, always in the same place, doors open, lights dead, the wet handprint mocking me silently. My hands shook, my eyes scanning the rain-streaked horizon, but the hollow swallowed everything familiar, leaving only the grey blur of sky and water. I thought about stopping, letting the truck idle, waiting for the storm to ease, but the air had grown thick and heavy, pressing against me, making it hard to breathe. Every sound, the drip of water from the trees, the splash of tires into hidden puddles, was amplified. I imagined footsteps, faint and rapid, following me just beyond the range of my headlights. My brain tried to rationalize it, telling me it was exhaustion, fear, the storm playing tricks, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Each time I approached the car, I half expected someone to emerge, dripping wet, calling my name, but there was never anything. Just the handprint, the open doors, the deafening rain. Hours, or maybe only minutes, passed. The hollow twisted in ways that didn't make sense. Trees leaning closer, branches scratching the roof of my truck, water swallowing the edges of the road. I tried different turns, backtracking whenever possible, but always the same result. Deeper into the maze. Always ending at the abandoned car. Always the same wet handprint. Always the same sense of being trapped in a place that didn't want me to leave. The storm was relentless, every thunderclap rattling through my chest, every bolt of lightning illuminating the hollow like a theater, revealing only more trees and water, more impossibility. I don't know how long it took, but eventually I found a stretch of road that seemed to curve toward what I recognized as the main hollow road. I drove slowly, eyes darting to the sides. The abandoned car nowhere in sight now. The hollow quiet, but still menacing. I don't know if it had been a trick of the rain, a hallucination, or something else entirely, but the memory of that night has stayed with me. lodged in my chest like a stone. I see the grey sky, feel the pressure of heavy rain, and my hands tense on the wheel, imagining the car ahead, the handprint, the sense of being endlessly chased down a road that refused to let me leave. Even now, when the clouds gather and rain begins to fall, I hesitate before taking certain roads. The hollow is alive in memory, a place that bends perception. A stretch of gravel that seemed to loop back on itself, mocking my every attempt at escape. I try to tell myself it was just a storm, just fatigue, just the mind playing tricks. But every time the rain hits the windshield and water pools in the dips of the road, I can see it again. The abandoned car, doors open, lights dead, the fresh handprint pressed into the seat as though someone, or something, was waiting for me to follow it deeper into the hollow. I don't know what I would have found if I hadn't eventually broken free, if the road had continued to twist and fold in on itself. The memory is haunting because it feels like a fragment of some larger pattern I can't grasp, some logic to the hollow that I will never understand. The wet handprint is still vivid in my mind, the way it shimmered in the rain-soaked interior, the implication that someone was there moments before, or perhaps someone still is, waiting for the next traveler to chase a shortcut into nowhere. The storm seems louder in memory than it did that night, as though it was screaming to warn me, as though the hollow itself had consciousness and was angry at my intrusion. I tell this story quietly, to friends who nod politely, thinking it's just another Appalachian oddity, but I know better. I know the hollow has a way of bending time, of trapping people in loops, of leaving traces of presence that shouldn't exist. The car, the doors, the handprint, they were real, undeniably so, and the fear I felt that night was as raw and primal as anything I've ever experienced. I remember the feeling of helplessness, the way the storm seemed to close in on me, the way the hollow refused to let me find my way out, and the way the abandoned car kept appearing. Like a ghost or a warning etched in mud and water. Years have passed, but the hollow remains alive in my memory. Whenever the rain begins to pool on the gravel roads near that ridge, I think of the storm, the abandoned car, the wet handprint, and I feel that same chill crawl up my spine. I avoid those roads when possible, and yet I know the hollow is still there, waiting, patient, its memory longer than my own, its loops ready for the next traveler to wander too far and too deep, and I am left with that final, lingering terror, the sense that some roads don't lead anywhere, and some storms carry with them a presence that sees and remembers, even after the rain has stopped. Story 5, Shadows in the Lightning Strike. I was hiking alone along a narrow trail carved into the side of a ridge, miles from any town, when the clouds gathered like a wall over the hills. The wind had that sharp bite to it that told you rain was coming fast, and I had a creeping sense that I'd underestimated the storm. By the time I noticed the first fat drops on my jacket, I was already committed too far down the path to turn back without slipping into mud or worse. The trees overhead swayed and groaned under the wind, and every snap of a branch made me flinch. My flashlight was my only anchor in the growing grey, though it flickered and hissed as the storm gained strength. The smell of wet pine and earth pressed in, thick and almost choking, and I cursed myself for not checking the forecast. Then the rain came in earnest, hammering the ground and drumming on the leaves above me like 1,000 small fists. I was soaked in seconds, the mud turning the trail slick underfoot, forcing me to move slower, carefully, all while trying to find a safe spot to wait out the worst of it. I found a natural overhang along the ridge, a sort of jagged rock lip that jutted over a shallow slope. I pressed myself under it, trying to keep the flashlight steady, and listened as the storm ripped across the hills. Thunder rolled low and deep, rattling the bones in my chest, and each flash of lightning made the woods beyond the overhang shudder in stark white light. I tried to calm my breathing, tried to tell myself it was just a storm, nothing more. But then it happened. One sharp bolt of lightning struck far enough away to illuminate the valley, and I caught movement, shapes standing motionless just beyond the brush. I froze, heart hammering, stomach twisting. The figures were faint at first, just blurs between the trees, but something about the posture, the way they held themselves, felt deliberate, watching, waiting. And then, just as quickly as they appeared, the lightning was gone, leaving only the grey blur of the rain-soaked forest. They were gone. Or maybe they'd never been there at all. I tried to shake the chill crawling up my spine, telling myself my imagination was exaggerating shadows, playing tricks in the flickering light of my wet flashlight. But then the lightning struck again, closer this time, and the shapes returned. There were more of them, or maybe I'd simply noticed new ones, their forms twisted by the wet brush and shadow. Some leaned in ways that didn't feel human, shoulders hunched, arms long and hanging at odd angles. I swallowed hard, my tongue thick and dry in my mouth despite the rain, and tried to call out, tried to remind myself I was alone but safe, that there was no one here to watch me. My voice was swallowed immediately by the storm, thunder roaring over my shouted words until even I couldn't hear them. Every time lightning struck, I saw them again, always just at the edge of sight, just outside the brush where I couldn't clearly make out faces or features. They never moved toward me, not in any direct way, but I could feel their gaze pressing on me through the sheets of rain. It was the kind of feeling that crawls under your skin and settles in your chest, making it impossible to think, impossible to breathe freely. I stayed pressed against the rock, trying not to tremble, trying to convince myself I'd only seen ghosts in the storm, but my instincts screamed otherwise. There was something deliberate in the way they stood, something that made me feel as if I had walked into a hunting ground I wasn't meant to know. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, the storm making it impossible to track time, and the shapes became a blur of repeated lightning strikes. Each flash seemed to add more of them, their outlines shifting with each crack of the sky. I thought of running, but the path behind me was a slick slope of mud and roots. Dangerous in daylight, and nearly impossible in the dark, pouring rain. Every step I imagined taking was accompanied by the fear of slipping, falling, and being left at their mercy, wherever mercy might be in the forest. I thought of the legends my grandfather had told me, of people disappearing on ridges and hollows during storms, of feral groups that claimed the hills in the rain. He'd spoken of it like a warning, a tale meant to keep a boy from wandering too far into the woods alone. And now, soaked to the bone, I understood why. I tried to focus on the sounds I could control, listening for the birds that had long since gone silent, for the drip of water from the leaves, for the crunch of my own boots on the slick ground. But the storm was overwhelming. Every lightning strike distorted the shadows. Every clap of thunder seemed to come from right behind me, though there was no one there. My flashlight flickered violently, then went out entirely for a moment, plunging me into near total blackness, except for the white flash of lightning. And in that flash, they were closer, or at least one of them was. I could see a figure crouched low, emerging from the shadow of a tree just beyond a fallen log, watching me with what I can only describe as attention. I froze so completely I forgot to breathe, and the storm raged on as if to punish me for daring to witness it. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow misaligned, but my instincts refused the comfort of reason. Something about the posture, the deliberate stillness, the way it waited was all wrong. Not animal, not human entirely, but present, aware. I could feel the pressure in my chest build, my hands numb from both cold and fear. I wanted to call for help again, but there was no signal, no rescue coming, and the storm drowned out every sound I might make. I thought of running, thought of darting down the slope and risking everything, but the shapes seemed to multiply, emerging in every flash, always at the periphery of my vision. So I stayed pressed against the rock, hoping the rain would eventually hide me, hoping the lightning would stop revealing me. Hours passed, though I couldn't tell how many. The storm finally began to ease, the rain turning from a relentless hammer into steady drizzle. I dared a glance around. Heart still hammering, limbs stiff, the shapes had vanished. Or perhaps they had melted back into the shadow of the woods, but the sense of being watched lingered, thick as the fog rising from the valley below. I moved slowly, slipping down the trail with careful, measured steps. Every shadow and bent tree limb a potential threat. I dared not run, for running would draw attention, and I had no idea what attention might mean in those hills. Eventually, I stumbled back to my car, the storm spent but my nerves frayed. The mud was caked to my boots, my clothes heavy with rain, and the flashlight had long since died. I slid into the driver's seat, hands trembling as I turned the key, only to hear the engine cough and stall. My pulse rattled in my ears. I told myself to breathe, to wait, that nothing had followed me, that the hills had only been wild and empty and storm-swept. And yet, even as I drove back toward the highway, the memory of those shapes lingered like a shadow over the ridge. Every flicker of movement in the rearview mirror made me flinch. Every crack of distant thunder made my stomach twist. Weeks later, the memory of that hike still haunts me. I've returned to those hills only in my mind, imagining what might have happened if I'd moved differently, if I'd called out one more time, if I'd taken another path. Friends say I'm exaggerating, that storms make the mind play tricks, that the Appalachian woods have a way of turning shadows into phantoms. I want to believe that. I desperately do. But in the flashes of lightning that come with every summer storm now, I see shapes standing among the trees again, just for a second. And I remember the cold weight of their gaze. Something in those hills watches, waits, and does not forget. I don't know what I saw that day, whether it was human, whether it was something else, or if my own fear simply gave form to the dark. But I do know that when the sky cracks open and the storm rolls over the ridges, I hesitate to leave my cabin. I hesitate to step into the rain, and I hesitate, above all, to be alone. Even now, when the nights are quiet and the air still, I feel the brush of those shapes in the corners of my vision, the same unnatural stillness I felt on that ridge, and I cannot shake it. I think about that storm constantly, the smell of wet pine, the hammer of rain, the flickering white flashes, and the figures that emerged just for a heartbeat in the lightning. I can't explain it. No one could, and that's what terrifies me most, the unknown. The unprovable, the undeniable sense that someone or something was there, waiting, patient and aware. And though I try to forget, to convince myself it was nothing more than fear and imagination, I know in my bones that it wasn't. It was real, and somewhere out there it still waits. I haven't returned to that ridge. I don't plan to, and yet, every time the sky darkens and a storm begins to build, I find myself checking the windows, listening to the trees and remembering the shapes that appeared for just a second in the lightning. They were not human, not fully, yet not entirely unreal. Somewhere in that flash, they existed. Somewhere in that storm, they wait, and I can never unsee them. Story 6. The Bridge That Vanished. I remember the rain coming down so hard that it felt like it had weight, hammering against my windshield and turning the familiar road into something unrecognizable. The gravel slicked with mud, water pooling in low spots. I could barely see past a few feet in front of my car. I was heading home after a long day in the holler, tired and hoping to beat the worst of the storm when I saw the bridge. At first I thought I was imagining it, my mind playing tricks after years of driving that same stretch. But it didn't feel right. The wooden planks seemed too long, too dark, and the way the rain struck them made shadows that danced and twisted in unnatural patterns. I slowed the car, gripping the wheel tighter, trying to make sense of it. As I drew closer, I caught movement near the edge of the bridge. Just a flicker at first, like a shadow shifting behind the sheets of rain. My heart picked up, that unmistakable hammering in my chest that tells you something is wrong. I squinted, leaning forward, and in the blur of the storm, I thought I saw a figure crouched by the side. Maybe a person, maybe not. But before I could process it, it shifted, melting into the rain like it had never been there. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and when I looked again, the bridge itself seemed to change. The familiar curve of the river was gone, replaced by a black void that made my stomach lurch. My mind screamed that it couldn't be real. I had crossed this bridge countless times, memorized every plank, every crack, every groove in the rail, but now it was alien, warped, dangerous. I tried to back up, the tires crunching over mud and gravel as I pulled slowly, cautiously, but the sensation of being watched was immediate and heavy. Every instinct told me to flee, yet my body refused to move faster than a crawl. The rain poured, mixing with my sweat, blurring vision and sense, until the forest on either side of the road seemed to bend inward, shadows reaching toward me from the trees. I thought about screaming, but the storm swallowed every sound. My voice would have been meaningless here, lost in the roar of wind and water. Minutes passed, or maybe it was hours, and I couldn't tell, my mind fixating on the black nothing where the bridge should have been. I dared to glance at the edge of the void, expecting the crouching figure to reappear, but there was nothing. And yet I felt eyes, dozens of them, pressed into me from all sides. Something in the hollow was awake tonight, and it knew I was intruding. My breathing became ragged, chest tight, hands slick on the steering wheel. I wished for the familiar glow of the next turn, the comforting curve of the road, anything that would tell me I was still in the world I knew. Slowly, painstakingly, I eased the car backward, counting the seconds between flashes of lightning that illuminated the trees in stark, silver lines. That's when I saw it, just for a heartbeat, a silhouette standing in the middle of the blackened void. Not tall, not short, not human in proportion, yet eerily lifelike. It didn't move, didn't blink, didn't seem aware of the rain pelting it like bullets. My stomach knotted, bile rising, and I realized that even if I fled, it wouldn't let me go. Something about this place had changed, and it wasn't going to let me leave unchanged. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the familiar contours of the bridge reappeared, warped but recognizably the one I'd known all my life. I didn't stop to examine it, didn't slow to think, just floored the accelerator and prayed the tires would hold on the slick gravel. The storm stayed relentless, the rain cutting at my skin through the closed windows, but I forced myself to breathe, to focus on the turn in the road, on the sight of my headlights catching the familiar lines of the forest. Still, even as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that the bridge, or what I had seen, had never truly been there, and that the hollow had opened some door I wasn't meant to enter. I made it home that night, soaked and shaking, and tried to tell myself it was just the storm, exhaustion, maybe a trick of the headlights and the shadows. But I can't. Every time it rains like that, I see it again in my mind's eye. The black void where the bridge should have been, the crouching figure, the unnatural length of the planks, and the way the river roared differently than it ever had before. I have driven that road dozens of times since, yet I avoid the old bridge, taking the long way around, listening to the wind through the trees, trying not to imagine what waits when the rain comes down heavy and the world blurs. Even now, sitting at home, the memory of that night presses down on me. I remember the cold, the way the wind cut through the car, the smell of wet wood and mud, and the impossibility of the void that swallowed the bridge whole. I can't explain it. There's no logic, no sense in what I saw. Only the lingering certainty that something was there, watching, waiting, aware of me in a way that no human could be. Sometimes I wonder if I'd turned the wheel too slowly, if my hesitation kept me tethered to that hollow, if the figure, or whatever it was, had meant to let me go. I'll never know. All I know is that the storm left me changed, uneasy, and that every time I approach that stretch of road, the weight of that memory bears down, and I can feel, just beyond the edge of sight, the horror watching me still. I don't drive that way in storms anymore. I don't take shortcuts through that part of the holler, and when the rain falls heavy on the roof, I hear it differently. The patter like footsteps on the bridge that vanished, the river roaring in impossible directions, and the faint, almost imperceptible whisper that comes with it. I tell myself I am safe inside, that the car, the house, the roads are solid and familiar. But in the quiet moments, when the storm dies down for just a second, I swear I can see it again. The warped planks stretching into nothing, and the eyes always watching. I will never cross that bridge again. Not in this life. And I think, sometimes, that perhaps it will always be waiting, ready to warp again in a storm, ready to pull someone else into its impossible, watery blackness. The holler keeps its secrets, and I have learned that the safest thing is not to seek understanding, but to respect the unexplainable. Still, the memory lingers, and when the rain falls, it's like the bridge is calling my name, reminding me of a night when the world shifted and I saw a place that may not exist at all. Story 7. Flickering Lantern on the Ridge. The rain started slow, almost teasing, soft against the brim of my hat as I trudged up the muddy trail. I'd been hiking all morning, the kind of hike where the air carries the scent of wet pine and the distant mountains blur into grey mist, and I thought I knew these ridges like the back of my hand. By midday, the clouds thickened so fast I could barely see the next step without squinting, and soon the drizzle became a relentless hammering. My boots sank into the softened earth with every step, and the trail disappeared under little rivers that had formed from the slope. I should have turned back when the first flicker appeared, that faint wavering glow through the trees, but something, a mix of curiosity and that gut-level unease that creeps up your spine in the backwoods, made me push forward. The light bobbed, small and distant, like a lantern held by someone staggering through the wet underbrush, but when I picked up my pace, it would drift farther, always keeping just beyond reach. My flashlight did little to pierce the gloom. Its beams sliced through the curtain of rain in a narrow cone, illuminating nothing but dripping ferns and jagged roots. Still, I followed, my heart thrumming, my mind oscillating between reason and the strange pull of the impossible. The further I went, the narrower the trail became, twisting over fallen logs and roots slick with rain. The trees leaned over me, branches heavy with water, and I kept thinking I heard them whisper, more the kind of sound the forest makes when it's alive and angry than any human voice, but enough to set my nerves on edge. The glow shifted slightly as I neared a clearing, disappearing behind the dark trunks as if the forest itself wanted to toy with me. Every few steps my boots would squelch in mud, and my soaked clothes stuck to my skin, a constant, uncomfortable reminder that I was alone. The light flickered again, just at the edge of visibility, hovering above the wet grass. It moved in tiny, almost imperceptible sways, like it had weight, like it was breathing, and that subtle motion, so human and yet impossible, made my stomach tighten. I slowed, half expecting someone to step forward, but the clearing remained empty, the light seemingly suspended on its own. I tried calling out, my voice swallowed by the drum of rain and the sighing wind through the pines. Nothing answered. But the light didn't vanish either. It stayed there, teasing, almost taunting, and I couldn't shake the feeling it was aware of me. I crouched behind a fallen log, peering over, trying to see if it was some other hiker trapped or a lost camper. But there was no trail leading from the woods into the clearing, no footprints, nothing disturbed except the rain-slick grass reflecting the pale glow. And yet, it wasn't a trick of the storm either. I could see it move, sometimes bobbing up and down, sometimes tilting as if someone, or something, were adjusting its hold. My chest tightened with a cold, creeping dread. I had been through sudden storms before, had seen animals flash through the tree line and shadows play with my mind. But this was different. The way the light lingered just out of reach felt purposeful. It wasn't meant to lead me anywhere. It was meant to keep me there. I edged closer, careful not to slip on the slick roots, but as I approached, the light would retreat, drifting in a slow arc that made the clearing seem larger, deeper than it should be. My legs shook, my wet fingers gripping my flashlight as if its thin beam could offer some protection. Every rustle of the trees made me start, and I could hear my own ragged breathing over the rain. I told myself it had to be someone lost, someone using a lantern to find their way, but the way it moved didn't make sense. There were no paths through the brush it seemed to follow, no footprints in the mud, no sound of movement beyond the occasional drip from the canopy. And still, it was there, floating, swaying, like some unearthly pulse embedded in the storm. I wanted to leave, every instinct screaming at me, but a part of me, the stubborn curiosity, the human urge to see and understand, kept me rooted. I had to know what it was. I stepped into the clearing finally, the ground squelching underfoot, and for the first time, I got close enough to see it more clearly. The glow was pale, almost watery, and it hung a few feet above the grass. I blinked against the rain stinging my eyes, sure it was a trick, a reflection, a lantern caught on a branch. But there was nothing there, nothing that could hold a light. No person crouched or standing, no object to hang it from. Just the mist, the rain, the pulsing glow hovering impossibly in place, swaying like it had weight and intention. I backed up slowly, heart hammering, and the moment my back hit a tree, the light flinched as if aware, tilting ever so slightly, like it had noticed my fear. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, and a cold dread settled over me. It wasn't just strange. It wasn't just unexplainable. It was alive in a way that made my skin crawl, a presence without a form, tethered to the clearing and the storm, watching, aware, waiting. Lightning split the sky overhead, illuminating the forest in a white glare, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw more than the lantern. Shapes moved in the trees, subtle and swift, shadows flitting just beyond the rain. I blinked, and they were gone, leaving only the glow, suspended above the grass like a heartbeat of light. I realized then that I had been holding my breath, paralyzed by the fear that to move might provoke something beyond comprehension. My mind raced with half-formed explanations, some local legend of lost wanderers, some trick of the storm, the way water and light bend in the rain. But every rational thought seemed thin and fragile against the starkness of that impossible glow. I took a hesitant step back, and it seemed to retreat as well, almost teasing me, reminding me that I was not in control. I called out again, my voice cracked and drowned by the storm. Nothing returned, and I understood fully that no one was there. Nothing human, at least, was there. Just that persistent, impossible light. The rain let up only slightly, enough to feel the cold settling into my bones, and I forced myself to move, edging backward along the trail that had led me to the clearing. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder, and the lantern floated just at the edge of my vision. Never close enough to see details, never far enough to feel safe. My mind tried to rationalize, to tell myself I had stumbled into someone lost, maybe a camper, maybe some prankster hiker, but the clearing had no paths, no tents, no campfire remnants, no signs anyone had ever been there, and yet the light stayed, swayed, breathed in a way that made my chest ache. I felt eyes on me, though there was nothing to see, and the realization settled like a stone in my gut that this wasn't a prank. This wasn't a mistake. This was something else, something tied to the storm and the ridge, waiting, patient. I stumbled on a slick root and nearly fell, catching myself against a tree, and the lantern swung slightly, almost as if acknowledging my misstep. Panic surged and I ran, reckless, ignoring the mud sucking at my boots, the branches tearing at my clothes, the rain blinding me. The light kept pace, drifting above the clearing, bobbing in time with my rapid steps, a silent sentinel that mocked my fear. I wanted to scream, to shout for help, but my voice was a thin rasp swallowed by the mountain wind. Every tree seemed alive, every shadow a potential threat, and still the lantern hovered, taunting, swaying, untouchable. I ran until the clearing was behind me, till I thought I had put distance between myself and the impossible light. And then the storm began to thin, the rain tapering into a drizzle, the clouds breaking enough to glimpse the pale grey of the ridge above. When I reached my car, drenched and shivering, I thought I had escaped. The headlights cut a cone into the wet gravel, but in the back of my mind, I could still see the glow, suspended, impossibly still, as if etched into my memory. I drove home slowly, hands tight on the wheel. Rain streaking the windshield, mind replaying every detail, every sway, every heartbeat of that hovering lantern. I told myself it had to be a trick of light, a reflection, a hallucination induced by exhaustion and storm. But even as I parked and stripped the wet clothes from my body, the image persisted. It lingered behind my eyes at the edge of my vision, like some stubborn ember refusing to die. Nights since, in storms, in flashes of lightning, I see it again, suspended above wet grass, swaying as if breathing, and I feel that same creeping dread, that same helpless curiosity. And I remember fully that the mountains hold things that don't belong to the world I know, things that watch and wait silently, and that sometimes a light is more than just a lantern. It is a sentinel, impossible and patient, keeping a quiet vigil over the ridges where I walk too close to something I will never fully understand. Story 8, Lost Hiker in the Drenched Woods. I remember that night so clearly, even now, that I can feel the wet chill creeping under my clothes as I tell it. I had been hiking alone, pushing through a narrow, twisting path in the backcountry when the storm rolled in without warning. Dark clouds swallowing the ridges and hammering the trees with rain that seemed intent on driving me off the trail. The forest was alive with the sound of water pounding the leaves, branches groaning under the weight of the downpour, and the occasional crack of distant lightning splitting the sky. Visibility was near zero, and the mud beneath my boots was turning every step into a cautious negotiation with gravity. It was the kind of rain that blinds you not just with water, but with its insistence, its raw persistence. I had my hood pulled tight and my flashlight clutched in one hand, though it did little more than throw weak pools of light onto the blackened ground, shadows dancing and stretching beyond the beam. I thought I was alone, just me and the storm, until a sound, faint at first, cut through the torrent. A voice, hoarse and desperate, calling for help. My heart thumped hard, a mix of relief and alarm, as I paused to listen, straining to locate the direction. It was coming from deeper in the woods, where the trail twisted into tight gullies and the trees grew thick enough that the storm's roar felt muffled beneath their canopy. I called out in response, my own voice swallowed instantly by the hammering rain, the words bouncing uselessly into the trees. But the cries continued, uneven, almost frantic, and I felt the pull of curiosity and dread all at once. I had to find them, or at least know they weren't in trouble. As I trudged forward, each step sinking into the saturated earth, I began to notice signs that someone else had passed this way recently. Broken twigs, footprints pressed deep into the mud, and a couple of water bottles abandoned haphazardly along the side of the path. It was unmistakable. Another hiker, lost or fleeing, and probably scared half out of their mind. My pulse quickened. I called again, louder this time, hoping the person would hear me and respond. But there was nothing, no reply, just the occasional splash of rain and the eerie whistle of wind through the trees. The cries, when they returned, were fainter, further away, almost impossibly distant. And then, just as suddenly, they would be right beside me, echoing as though the woods themselves were speaking, bending space and sound in ways that made my stomach tighten with unease. I paused, flashlight trembling in my hand, and tried to rationalize it. The storm was playing tricks. The rain, the uneven ground, the echo of my own movements. It had to be. But as I took another step, the voice sharpened again, unmistakably human, and I thought I saw movement in the periphery of my vision. Shapes, or perhaps shadows, that didn't belong to the trees shifted just out of the beam, keeping pace with me as if waiting for me to notice. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but the cries tugged at something deeper, an impossible blend of empathy and fear. Then it happened. The cries changed, no longer calling for help, but moving strangely, almost faster than any human could. They didn't follow the contours of the trail anymore. They bounced from ridge to ridge, echoing in directions that defied logic. I stumbled over roots and slick mud, trying to keep up, and the forest began to feel alien, as if the path I had known for hours, or perhaps years, was twisting beneath the storm. I called out again, voice cracking. And this time I caught the faintest sense of movement to my right, near a tangle of roots and ferns. My flashlight flickered over a broken branch, bent unnaturally, and a deep depression in the mud that hadn't been there before. The echoing cries were here, so close, yet no one appeared. Panic began to seep into my bones, cold and sharp. My sense of direction fractured, the storm's roar filled every space, and I realized with a sinking clarity that I was no longer following a person. I was following an echo, a reflection of a voice that didn't exist in real time. Each step I took only seemed to extend the distance between me and the sound, and every glimpse of movement was gone the moment I looked directly at it. My flashlight flickered again, dying briefly in the saturated air, and when it sputtered back to life, the trail ahead had vanished into a wall of dripping foliage and shadows. I tried to retrace my steps, slipping and sliding through mud that threatened to swallow my boots. The cries continued, now more fragmented, weaving in and out of the rain, coming from impossible angles. I shouted, begged, tried to convince the woods to reveal their secret, but the only response was the relentless storm, the whisper of water over leaves, and the shifting shadows that seemed to breathe just beyond my reach. I felt watched, though by what I could not say. There was no one there, but something, some presence, some awareness, followed every step, I could feel it in the brush against my shoulders, in the way the wind carried the sound of my own ragged breathing back to me, distorted. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Time lost all meaning in the downpour. My hands were numb, my clothes soaked through, and my boots heavy with mud, and still the cries pulsed around me, teasing, calling, always slightly ahead, always just out of reach. I considered stopping, lying down in the mud and letting the storm wash over me, pretending this was a dream I would wake from. But a deeper instinct, the raw survival part of me, forced me onward. Finally, as the rain began to ease, I stumbled through a thin veil of mist and undergrowth and found a familiar marker, the main trail, the one I had left hours before, somehow still intact. Relief was immediate and crushing, but it did nothing to erase the unease that had settled deep into my chest. The cries had faded behind me, leaving only the wet rustle of leaves and the slow drip of water from the trees. I turned back once, flashlight sweeping the forest behind me, and saw nothing. No person, no shadows, nothing but empty trees glistening under the dying storm. I reached the parking area eventually, mud caked into every seam of my boots, clothes clinging to my skin, and I sat in my car shaking, staring out into the darkened woods. The storm had moved on, leaving a damp, heavy silence. I called the ranger station when I could catch a signal, and they assured me no one had reported being lost in the area that night. It made sense in a way I didn't want to confront. The trail signs were undisturbed, and the forest, in its quiet aftermath, seemed perfectly normal. Yet the memory of the cries, the impossible way they had moved, and the shapes I thought I glimpsed between trees stayed with me. Every time I close my eyes, I can hear them, fading, returning, never quite gone. Weeks later, I returned to the same path, cautious, determined to understand what had happened. The trail was ordinary, muddy in places, but nothing extraordinary or terrifying greeted me. No signs of another hiker, no disturbances beyond what a storm might have caused. Nothing to suggest the presence of the entity my mind had imagined, or perhaps encountered. And yet, every time it rains, the memory returns. I hear those distant calls, impossibly distant yet achingly close, echoing in the hollow spaces of my mind. I tell myself it was a trick of the storm, an illusion born from fatigue and fear. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind rattles the windows, I swear I can hear the faintest whisper of help carried on the wind, calling from somewhere deep in the drenched woods. And I am reminded that some things, once glimpsed, never truly leave. I cannot explain what I followed that night, what voice I tried so desperately to reach, or what watched me as I stumbled through the mud and rain. All I know is the sound of it, the impossibility of its motion, and the certainty that for a few hours I walked through a place where the normal rules of the world had fractured. And sometimes, when I stand near a window watching a storm pound the hills, I imagine that the path still exists somewhere, that the lost hiker I thought I found is still wandering, guided by cries that are not theirs, in a forest that has decided I will never understand it. I carry it with me, the fear, the memory, the questions that have no answers. The storm left the woods drenched and silent, but the echo did not fade, and I know I am not alone in my recollection. There is something in those hills, something patient, something that waits for the storms to draw people in, and I have seen its work firsthand. I have told this story many times, hoping that words might exorcise the dread lodged deep in my chest, but every retelling brings it back, as vivid as the first scream, as relentless as the rain that night. The forest may appear calm now, the trails dry and familiar, but the memory lingers, stubborn and unyielding, a quiet horror I can never quite shake, echoing like that lost voice in the drenched woods. Story 9, rainwater drumming on the shack. The rain came down in sheets, blurring the world into a grey smear of dripping trees and muddy paths. I'd been hiking the ridge all afternoon, expecting nothing more than a short storm to cut across the mountains, but by the time I spotted the little shack tucked behind a thicket of saplings, the sky had opened fully. The tin roof rattled with a relentless rhythm, each drop hammering like a drumbeat against my soaked jacket. I pushed the door open, stepping inside, the smell of old wood and damp earth hitting me instantly. It was cramped, barely enough room to turn, and the floor sagged slightly in the middle. I leaned against the wall, trying to shake off the chill that seeped through my clothes, listening to the storm's percussion overhead. For a while, it was just the rain, rhythmic and hypnotic, and I let my mind settle. But soon, I noticed something else. Beneath the hammering of the rain, there was a subtle tapping, almost like scratching, coming from the corner of the shack opposite me. My eyes strained in the dim grey light filtering through the warped boards. Nothing moved. I told myself it was rats, or the wind catching some loose piece of wood, but the rhythm didn't match anything natural. It moved, slowly at first, inching closer, keeping pace with my heartbeat. I shifted, leaning forward, straining to see the source. The air felt heavier now, thick with something more than moisture. Every few seconds, the scratching advanced a little closer, like a deliberate exploration, brushing against the thin, shadowed walls. I tried to focus on the storm outside, to convince myself that the sound was nothing. The rain pounded with the same intensity, but this new rhythm, this closer, more methodical noise, pulled my attention back. It was unnerving in a way that no storm could be. I could almost feel it watching, feeling the floorboards beneath its invisible weight. The shack seemed smaller all of a sudden, every corner a potential hiding spot. I swallowed hard, glancing around. There was nothing to see, and yet the noise kept moving. Sometimes it would pause, then resume in a deliberate shuffle, closer and closer to where I had settled. I wanted to leave, to run out into the rain and risk the slippery path back to my car. But the thought of stepping into the storm without a solid footing froze me. Minutes, or was it hours, passed like this. The tapping seemed to pulse along with the rain, a quiet counterpoint to the deafening drum overhead. I whispered my own voice into the room, calling out, "Hello?" My words swallowed immediately by the storm. No reply, only the tapping persisted, now just inches from the edge of my jacket. My stomach churned. I convinced myself to peer over, trying to catch a shadow or movement, and that's when the rational part of me whispered something too disturbing to ignore. The sound was coming from everywhere at once, circling me, breathing around me. The shack felt alive in a way that made the hairs on my neck stand straight. I could hear a faint scraping along the boards near my feet, almost as if something or someone was testing me, measuring my courage. My hands shook and my lungs felt tight. I considered staying put, hoping the storm would pass, but the instinct to flee grew stronger, gnawing at me like hunger. I grabbed my soaked pack, slipping on the wet floor, and threw open the door. Cold rain slammed into me, a sudden shock of clarity, and I ran, barefoot, the mud sucking at my heels as the world dissolved into sheets of grey and white. The sound followed me, not the rain, but that hollow, purposeful drumming, scraping, moving with me across the slick path. Each step felt weighted, like the forest itself was pressing down, watching. Branches slapped my face and tore at my sleeves, yet I didn't slow. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but something drove me forward, something unseen keeping pace just behind, laughing quietly with the rhythm of the storm. My hands found rocks and branches for balance, my feet slipping in the churned mud, but still the noise followed, never changing, never fading. Finally, through the curtain of rain, I saw the dark silhouette of my car, the dim yellow of the interior lights blinking through the storm. Relief surged, and I lunged for the door, barely keeping my footing. I dropped inside, shivering violently, and slammed the door. Silence met me immediately. The drumming stopped. The scratching vanished. The storm's pounding outside was normal again, regular, indifferent. My heart thudded so hard it echoed in the small cabin of the car. I stared out the window at the shack in the distance, half hidden behind the slick brush, but there was nothing now. Nothing moving, nothing alive or threatening, or so I told myself. I sat there for what felt like forever, soaked and trembling, waiting for the rain to ease. Yet the emptiness left a hollow resonance in my chest, louder than any storm could. Even as I started the car and drove away, the memory of those inches around me, where something had seemed to watch, to move, to breathe just beyond sight, clung to me. It was the kind of fear that makes your skin crawl long after the danger has passed. A slow burn that seeps into your bones. That night, dripping into my apartment, wrapped in towels, I lay awake. The storm outside was gone, the city lights blinking through the windows, normal in every sense. Yet I could still hear it. That tapping, that methodical scraping, threading itself through the sound of dripping faucets, the creak of the old radiator. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it had been a trick of exhaustion, the imagination running wild in a cramped, wet shack, but my chest tightened every time I thought about it. It had been purposeful, it had been deliberate, it had been aware of me. Days passed, but the memory persisted. I found myself hesitant to return to the mountains, reluctant even to walk past old sheds and abandoned cabins in my neighborhood. Every sudden noise, the tick of a loose shutter, the scuff of shoes on the pavement, a branch scraping against a window, set my nerves on edge. My friends noticed me jump at shadows, my own footsteps causing a startle. I never spoke of it to them fully, only hints, laughs that didn't reach my eyes because I wasn't sure even I could explain it without sounding insane. Weeks later, when a light rain started again, I felt my stomach knot. I imagined the shack, tin roof rattling, something unseen circling in the corners, waiting for the next wanderer to step inside. I couldn't stop seeing the path back into the woods, mud sucking at my ankles, rain hammering the earth. That strange rhythm of a presence that shouldn't exist, yet undeniably had. The forest had a way of holding its secrets close, of shifting things, bending perception, and that shack, small, innocuous, forgotten by every map, held something too deliberate to be random. Even now, months later, I hear a faint tapping sometimes when I'm alone at night, and my mind snaps to the shack, to the storm, to that precise, purposeful rhythm. I know it was real, not a dream, not fatigue. Because fear that physical, that insistent doesn't lie. The rustle of leaves in my yard, the creak of my floorboards, every subtle sound reminds me that what I experienced wasn't a hallucination. Something followed me out of those mountains. Something that didn't need form to exist. Something that had learned my pace, my habits, my fear. And the shack, tiny and hidden among the trees, waits for the next traveler to mistake safety for shelter, to step inside and be reminded that storms are not always the worst things that can happen in the woods. I still hike occasionally, always sticking to the marked trails, always with another person, always scanning the edges of the tree line for the faintest movement. Yet even in broad daylight, the memory of that night lingers like a shadow behind my eyes. It's a quiet, insidious fear, not the thrill of a haunted story, not the adrenaline of a near miss, but the kind of dread that settles under your skin, that makes you question your own perceptions. The shack, the rain, the drumming, it's all etched into me, a rhythm I can't escape, a presence that doesn't need form to haunt. I don't speak of it often, but when the wind starts to carry the smell of wet earth or the faint rhythm of rainfall taps against a distant roof, I pause, and in those moments, I know with a certainty that chills me to the core. The woods remember, the shack remembers, and somewhere in the corners of every storm, the drumming waits. I don't know if I'll ever walk those trails alone again. I don't know if I'll ever forget the wet, suffocating embrace of that shack, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and damp earth, the drumming that followed me from corner to corner, inch by deliberate inch. And I don't know if anyone who finds that place will hear it the same way I did, or if the woods choose who they want to haunt. All I know is that night exists somewhere between memory and nightmare, and sometimes, just sometimes, I feel it brushing the edges of my mind, a quiet, endless rhythm that can't be escaped, no matter how far you run.